Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Eventually, when I got back into Canada after customs, there was a health officer, and he explained to me that I needed to pay $2,000 for a COVID hotel, a government-approved COVID hotel. And I told them, I pay for my own uh, townhouse in Paris, Ontario, and I don't need to go to a hotel because I have my own place that's empty. I'm actually in an empty house right now, quarantining. So they got very angry with me and they fined me $6,000. And then they started threatening me to take the COVID test.
He couldn't get a direct flight home. He actually had to fly through Panama, which cost him quite a few $1,000s more, plus room and board. Then when he gets home to the border, he's expected to do things that he wasn't necessarily advised that he was supposed to do ahead of time. And if he doesn't, he gets thousands of dollars in fines. Nick is a really upstanding, really nice guy. He's very articulate. It's just difficult for me to comprehend why people are put into this situation and the laws seemingly change while you're in your flight home.
The client that I'm featuring today as part of our Fight the Fines campaign, which is Canada's largest civil liberties work undertaken by any organization to date, intended to push back on the obscene intimidation and coercion tactics that are being imposed on everyday people by the sanitary regime. See, this client, he knows the aviation industry. He longed to be employed by it. And due to government restrictions, his chance of employment has taken a huge hit. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini, and today I'm bringing you the story of Nicholas Luiz. He dreamed of becoming a pilot, but thanks to travel restrictions and the insane hoops one has to jump through that further deter them from traveling, the industry that he was hoping to be employed by has faced devastating results. To add insult to injury, Nick is not only unemployed currently and out thousands of dollars in an education that he can't utilize, but now he faces outrageous fine amounts for simply traveling to support his girlfriend in grieving an ill family member. Here's his story.
I decided to go and travel to Brazil because my girlfriend, who's an international student, she hasn't been home for 2 years because of COVID laws, and her one of her family members is terminally ill. And because of all the lockdowns in Canada, I actually was not able to complete my schooling, and I lost my job too, so I wasn't able to do anything anyway. So I figured it was just the best time to travel while everything was shut down because I had nothing else we could do, and we haven't seen our family in a very, very long time.
I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, your schooling, you were hoping to be in the aviation industry. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the aviation industry took a really big hit. So I was supposed to have my commercial pilot's license in April, and I don't even have my private license, which is the first step. So I'm not even halfway, and I was supposed to have my entire career started already, and I'm not even halfway done now.
Mm-hmm. And is there any end in sight in that for you?
At this point, the schools are so destroyed, and I've even talked to other schools to see how it is, just because I was just curious to see how it is in other places, and it just seems like the entire industry is destroyed. So I don't think my school even knows. They're just playing it by ear and just trying to get by. It's just not a good time right now.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to hear that, but yeah. Anyway, back to the fines that you've incurred since returning back to Canadian soil. Let's run through a little bit of the hoops you had to jump through to actually get home.
So when I left Brazil, I had a connecting flight through the USA, and unfortunately, I didn't know that the USA banned all flights from Brazil. So I was not able to get onto the flight, and so I had to book another flight to Panama because the Canadian government is actually, I think, the only country that doesn't bring flights to Brazil to pick up their own citizens. So I had to buy a second ticket, fly to Panama, and then fly from Panama to Canada to get into Canada, which doesn't really make too much sense because I went to twice as many airports and I'd pay a lot of money for hotels, food, and to a second ticket. So then eventually when I got back into Canada after customs, there was a health officer, and he explained to me that I needed to pay $2,000 for a COVID hotel, a government-approved COVID hotel. And I told them, I pay for my own townhouse in Paris, Ontario, and I don't need to go to a hotel because I have my own place that's empty. I'm actually in an empty house right now, quarantining. So they got very angry with me and they fined me $6,000. And then they started threatening me to take the COVID test, which was another $6,000 fine. And at that point, I just told them, just give me the tickets because I was so angry with them. Initially, I was going to get the test done, but at that point, I decided to go home and I'll fight the fines in court.
And so you've obviously submitted your fines to our Fight the Fines campaign. And we're happy to provide you with top-notch legal defense to stand up against some of these questionable measures being imposed by the Canadian government on Canadian citizens. So your fines total upwards of $12,000.
I think with taxes, my fine's $12,500, which is insane for a single person. I'm also a student. Like, I don't even know how I'm going to pay for this, to be honest. It's a really big fine. I don't even have a job because of the government either, so I don't even know how they expect me to pay for it. It's pretty silly.
And going back to that PCR test, you had a negative test upon boarding your flight out of Brazil.
All flights going into the country or away from the country require a COVID test to get on the plane. So I already knew that I was healthy within a day before getting into Canada. So as long as you don't get sick on the plane, even if it wouldn't show positive because it takes some time for the virus to incubate in your body. So the test that in Canada doesn't even make sense to be doing it. It makes more sense to do it maybe after a few days in quarantine.
Yeah, and so on that note, have you had any follow-up since you've been quarantining?
No one's even followed up with me, or I think some people get PCR tests to take home with them, like self-test kits, and they didn't even give me a self-test kit. So like they've done nothing to follow up with me at all, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. So let me get this straight. Your education has been, the job potential for you post-education has been almost entirely decimated by the Canadian government and their COVID response. You incurred exponentially higher expenses having to travel through the United States just to get back into Canada. And then you face upwards of $12,000 worth of fines upon return to Canada. Can you make sense of that?
No, it's I find just everything that's been going on so destructive because like even if I had gotten my commercial license this year, like the entire aviation industry is destroyed. Like I don't know, like Air Canada's not flying, like no companies are flying anyways. So like it just seems like they destroyed everything that I was doing and working towards. So it's really upsetting. But
and to add insult to injury, you've now been fined these outrageous amounts just for simply trying to come home.
Yeah, and to see family too, which I personally think is very important, especially when people are getting older. You don't live forever, so I think that's very important, and it's something that I value. So I guess I just don't agree with anything that's been happening in the country recently.
Now, if you had a message for other travelers, what would that be?
I would tell them that if you're going to Brazil, make sure that you're connecting flights in Mexico or Panama because it's going to cost you a lot of money to book a new ticket and a headache. And I would tell them to be prepared to fight at the border. I think that unless you have both doses of vaccine, they're not going to let you get through at this point unless you go through all their hoops. So just be careful. Yeah.
And what about the Canadian government seemingly stranding their own citizens abroad? What would your message be to them?
Oh, I think it's disgusting. I understand that they have a job to do and they don't know how to handle it, but I just think they're going down the wrong path right now, and I don't think it's the right thing to do. Sometimes they have to pick what's the least bad option, and I definitely don't think this was the least bad option.
And as you said off camera to me earlier, the other governments are sending flights into these countries to pick up their citizens.
Every person should have a right to go back home to their country regardless of why they were traveling, and I don't think it's the government's job to be figuring out who was in the right to travel or who wasn't. I think they're overstepping their boundaries, and I think any citizen of any country should have the right to go home, and I don't think that's right at all.
This is how ridiculous and not thought out the restrictions placed on Canadians are. See, under the guise of keeping people safe and limiting contact, one has to make extra travel stops and come into contact with exponentially more people just to return home. And then if you have an empty home that you pay for, that you can return to, you're fined for not paying even more to stay at a run-down hotel where there's allegations that people are being withheld food, their medications, they're being denied access to fresh air, having their locks removed, and even allegations of sexual abuse. And of course, as part of our Fight the Fines campaign, which you can donate to if you're able at fightthefines.com. Well, thanks to our loyal viewers who care about civil liberties just as much as we do here at Rebel News, we have crowdfunded Nick's legal fees and hired Jenna Little to represent him. Here are her thoughts on his case.
Nicholas's case is quite interesting because he's one of the few people who was stuck in Brazil right when they started banning flights. So he couldn't get a direct flight home. He actually had to fly through Panama, which cost him quite a few $1,000s more, plus room and board. Then when he gets home to the border, he's expected to do things that he wasn't necessarily advised that he was supposed to do ahead of time. And if he doesn't, he gets thousands of dollars in fines. Nick is a really upstanding, really nice guy. He's very articulate. It's just difficult for me to comprehend why people are put into this situation and the laws seemingly change while you're in your flight home. And there's no room there. There's no wiggle room to assist people in this situation.
Mm-hmm. It seemed odd to me that the Canadian government was basically just stranding people in other countries and not giving them overly concrete advice on how to get back home, or making it easy for them, for that matter, to get back home. Now, without giving away the plan of attack here, how do you think you'll go about fighting this fine?
Well, this one might be difficult. So I'd have to look into when the laws changed in relation to his travel. In the beginning, when people were abroad, the government was giving people a lot of time to come home. But during the closures of the border, when people had to leave for compassionate or medical reasons, laws seemingly changed. So I need to find out what exactly the orders and councils were that were in place at the time that Nicholas was arriving and go from there.
The wishy-washy application of these restrictions that are ever-changing is enough to make anyone's head spin. While other countries have plans in place to get their people home, is it any surprise that the Trudeau Liberals have left us high and dry? I think that's more like the new normal. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. We thought that our charter rights were protected, but this year plus has shown us that maybe they're not. Freedom isn't free, and neither is this civil liberties work. If you care about upholding the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, then please consider donating to our campaign and help keep this fight afloat at fightthefines.com. With over 1,800 Fight the Fines cases and counting, we are giving Canadians peace of mind that they can say no and assert their rights despite threats of hefty fines. Head over to fightthefines.com and donate if you can.